Hi, everybody. Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Today, I want to introduce a brand new member of the GMAT Ninja team, an admissions consultant, Matt McDonnell. The reason why we brought Matt in and the reason why we love him here is he's made every single application mistake there is himself over 4 different rounds of applying to graduate school, plus a not very great round of applying to undergraduate institutions. He's worked in wealth management. He's worked in real estate. He's worked for a mega church nonprofit. He worked in brand management. He worked in product management. He's been all over the place in the work world, all over the place in the MBA world, experienced admissions consultant, fascinating guy. So before we jump into Matt's story, his full story in his words, again, 4 years of applications. He applied to 37 different graduate business schools over the years. He had 52 interviews at those business schools, and he even participated as an interviewer at the Tuck School of Business, where he interviewed about 40 MBA applicants himself. So this is the guy that's seen everything, done everything, made tons and tons of mistakes. And today I want to talk about Matt, all the mistakes he's made, all the things he learned, and how you can avoid those mistakes. So basically, Matt has made the mistakes for you. Going to give you the chance today to kind of learn from what he's done, and hopefully that'll make your application process easier, quicker, more successful, lead you to outcomes that you like better. So Matt, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Great to be here.
Hope I didn't embarrass you too much with all that. I'd love to jump right in. So when you first applied to undergraduate schools, applied to 6 schools, got rejected from all of them. I love that because, from a young age,
I'm glad you love it.
I'm sure you didn't at the time. Early teens, you kind of get the seed planted in your head. Yeah, maybe this is harder than I think it is. Maybe this isn't quite what I think it is. We're going to cut ahead to the next scene. So you graduate from undergrad. You work for 4 years in a mega church doing all sorts of things, all sorts of different job functions. And let's jump into that first round. So 4 years out of undergrad, you decide to apply to MBA programs. Tell us a little bit about what that round looked like for you, what happened, and kind of what was your mindset going into it?
Yeah. So I decided pretty late in the game in that application season that I'm going to go get an MBA. I've done it all here at the church, and now I'm going to go get some fantastic job and all those things. So I applied in the 3rd round, 2012, to 7 schools with a 700 GMAT. So, decent application profile, but nothing spectacular. And kind of surprised myself. And I got into 4 of those. So UCLA Anderson, Texas McCombs, UNC Keenan-Flagler, and Vanderbilt Owen. Great selection set. I was very pleased. I got waitlisted at Duke and Yale. And so when it came to decision time, it kind of just applied to the schools I thought I could get into. It wasn't, I wasn't in love with any of them necessarily, and I didn't dislike any of them, but I didn't have a real coherent view of what I wanted to do in my career or in school. And so when it came to decision time, it was, this went pretty well for round 3. Let's see what happens if I apply next year in round 1 and retake the GMAT. And so I did that. I retook the GMAT that summer, and round 2 began in earnest that fall.
Okay, so in that first round, what did you think you wanted to do with the MBA, and what were you telling schools you wanted to do, and were they the same thing? They aren't always, but what did you have in mind at that point?
Right. So I was coming out of working at a church, nonprofit world. That's all I really knew. Kind of touched all the different functional areas of business, finance, accounting, operations, all that, but only in the nonprofit space. And so I thought, wow, I'm ready to be a nonprofit consultant. And so I was telling schools, nonprofit consulting, I'm going to go work at a bridge span or one of the nonprofit arms of MBB or something like that. And but there was very little thought that went into that, Charles. That was very much here's the answer that I think makes the most sense and can get me in.
So at that point, was it you were trying to get in, and then was it sort of the I'm going to figure this out later sort of thing? It's like, hey, the story is I'm going to do nonprofit consulting, which sounds good. It's the kind of thing that obviously got you to some good schools. Right. But were you thinking, yeah, maybe I'll do that, but in all likelihood not, it's going to buy me a year or 2 to explore? Was that the mindset?
Yeah, I think for the most part, the nice thing about business schools is it really does, you can pivot to almost anything. And I don't think I fully appreciated that in the first year. So I certainly didn't have ambitions of going into iBanking or strategy consulting on the for-profit side. But I knew there'd be options and on-campus recruiting that I didn't, you don't even know what you don't know at that point. So it was kind of both and.
Fair enough. Okay, so a few months go by, so you get into 4 schools out of 7 you applied to. solid programs. You didn't necessarily know enough to be in love with them. And then you go, aha, I can do better than this. This was round 3.
That's right.
So you go retake the GMAT, you get a 750. Very nice. Where'd you apply and why?
So this is where I started at the rankings, which is notoriously the worst place to start. As you mentioned in your previous video, Charles, rankings are good for rankings and not so much for personal career journeys or fulfillment or anything like that. So I went to the very top. I found a little school named Stanford and another school named Harvard. Have you heard of those? Are you familiar? And you know, I thought, well, I just gave up 4 great offers. I might as well shoot for the top here. And again, there wasn't a lot of introspection going on. There wasn't a lot of career planning and connecting the dots between, you know, here's what Stanford will do for me, or here's what Harvard will do for me to accomplish these 3, 5, 7-year goals. It was just start at the top of the rankings and throw out some applications. So I applied to Stanford, Harvard, and Kellogg in round 1, and was kind of playing wait and see before I submitted round 2 applications that year.
And what happened?
I got into Stanford. Not so much Harvard and Kellogg, but I did get into Stanford, and that sort of sealed the deal. There was no visiting. There was no checking out, is this a good cultural fit? Is this a good career fit? It was, you get into Stanford, you go to Stanford kind of thing.
I know the feeling well.
Yeah.
So this is the part of the video where anybody who's paying attention is going to fall out of their seat. Tell us what happened once you got to Stanford. So you started Stanford. It's fall 2013 at this point.
That's right. Yep.
You got you have what we often hear from incoming students working on their GMAT, working on their GRE, working on their applications going, we literally see this from students. I'm going to go get that magic ticket at Stanford or Harvard. I see that phrase fairly frequently. You got your magic ticket. You're dancing off to Palo Alto. Life's great. What happened?
Yeah. Well, so for context, I moved there with my wife, and about a month before school started, we found out she was pregnant with what they were calling a complicated or high-risk pregnancy. And so that added kind of a new equation into the calculus of business school. And the birth would line up with my internship in the summer, and we were kind of like, not the best start, but went through orientation in the first week of classes. And I think the thing I'd highlight, Charles, the most is it was just sort of a cultural mismatch, or maybe a fit mismatch. I did not go to an elite undergraduate institution. I didn't have a blue chip company on my resume, and most of my peers did. And, you know, in most contexts, that's fine. But I just had a hard time kind of meeting, you know, my people there, my network, or kind of integrating into the culture. And I think what's really cool about Stanford on the one hand is it's so integrated in Silicon Valley, in the startup culture, in tech, in venture capital, that's really kind of the flavor of the business school there. It's very focused on that. People are coming to Palo Alto mostly to stay in Palo Alto. And I didn't have those aspirations. I wasn't aspiring to go on Sand Hill and do venture capital. I really was thinking, you know, maybe a Midwestern consumer packaged goods company or a lesser tech company in product management is kind of where I'd slot in. And so really the career goals didn't really match with what most folks at Stanford were doing. And so all the things kind of combined together, and, it just wasn't a good fit. It wasn't the right time. And we kind of went back to the drawing board a little bit on what's going to be the best MBA experience for me, not necessarily for most people. So
you're the guy that dropped out of Stanford Business School.
That's right.
The guy.
But not to start a unicorn. So that's the important qualifier.
and I guess at what point, so we have a fairly tight timeline here. So your first shot at the application. So spring 2012, round 3, you apply round 1 in the fall. So it's just a few months later. Yeah. And then you're matriculating at Stanford, about a year after that, a little bit less. So fairly tight timeline. You went from, okay, maybe nonprofit consulting. And then you're kind of talking about product management, maybe in tech, brand management, something like that, product management, maybe in a non-tech company potentially. When did that shift happen? And maybe just as importantly, where did it come from, and how deeply rooted was it? So as you walked onto campus at Stanford, a year and a half after your first application, were you pretty sure you want to do product management, or was it still kind of that exploration a little bit where it's like, I think that's the good direction, but I'm not sure?
Yeah, I think I postponed the introspection and discovery process for when I actually got on campus, which if you're watching, I do not recommend. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Truly, having worked in so many different functional areas and kind of a non-structured startup environment, I thought I could do kind of a little bit of anything, but I didn't really think, do I want to do anything? And I didn't really consider, given my values, given my family and what made me happy, where I really thrived in terms of work environments, what does that look like post MBA? I just didn't do the work beforehand. And so I kind of sauntered onto the Stanford campus thinking like, figure it out. Google's next door and Apple's down the road, and certainly something will work out. I don't necessarily recommend that as an entry point to your MBA. I think it's a lot more helpful to kind of know what career path suits you, your personality, where you're going to thrive, where you're going to grow. And I didn't do that work.
Okay, so tail between your legs. So you and you and your wife leave the Bay Area so that they, you're the one guy that drops out of Stanford Business School, not to found a unicorn, but because it's just not the right fit, not feeling the culture. Kind of the career aspirations weren't necessarily in line. You didn't necessarily need to be at a Stanford to achieve that someplace where the culture was going to be a better fit. So what then? So you leave the Bay Area. Then what did you do, and what led you into deciding you still want an MBA after all that?
Yeah, so we moved back home to Colorado, where we're both casting from now, and started getting into real estate investment work with a couple buddies here. And it was just wanted to see what it would look like to start my own company and buy and sell real estate. That was the depth of thought that went into it. Clearly, I like to think I've learned from this lack of critical thinking, but we'll see. And so, started buying and selling homes here. We had our son here, which was great, surrounded by family, surrounded by doctors we knew, and all that kind of stuff. But the dream never died. It was always, I always aspired to more on the educational side. I wanted to kind of eat up the academics of an MBA, but also thought, there's another human to support now. It'd be nice to make money in the future, and MBA is a great way to do that. And so that's when I kind of started solidifying what's the right work environment for me, what's the right career trajectory for me, what am I interested in, which is a very basic question, but not something that I necessarily asked myself prior to the first 2 rounds of applications. And the truth is, I wasn't really that interested in doing venture capital or private equity or investment banking. I was really interested in being kind of the hub on a wheel of the spoken wheel, where I touch all the functional areas, whatever that was I was doing, where I can get my hands dirty in finance and accounting and operations and leadership. And the best avenues for that were kind of brand management, product management, where you're kind of juggling all those balls at the same time. And so that summer, when I was kind of resetting from the Stanford experience, led to a lot of introspection, trying to figure out what I'm good at, what I enjoy doing for my career.
Okay, so backing up to kind of your original 4 years post undergraduate, before you started thinking about the MBA.
Yeah.
One of the things I think you said about it earlier, so it was kind of a startup sort of feel to it, where it's a rapidly growing church. Everyone wears a whole lot of hats. You get that cross-functional exposure really, really quickly, which I'm sure was part of the appeal of your application to a lot of these schools, where it's like, oh, wow, check out this guy in these 4 years. Like, he's touched every chunk of this organization and done a whole lot of really interesting stuff with it. And then it sounds to me, please correct me if this is unfair, Matt, but it sounds like as you're kind of saying, all right, nonprofit consulting, it's one of those terms that sounds really good. And it is, and I know plenty of people who are very happy nonprofit consultants. I'm not ragging on that occupation at all. But if you haven't thought through what the lifestyle is like, the lifestyle doesn't necessarily match what it sounds like. And then there's, okay, maybe I'm going to go into brand management, product management, and you hadn't fully thought through, what does it actually feel like? What do I do in this role day to day? What's the day to day? It sounds like that thinking was missing as you made the transition from the 4 years in the church over to MBA applications. It sounds like you hadn't thought about the day-to-day functions. Is that fair?
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the case. I think a lot of us tend to fall into kind of the idealized version of what we want our career to look like without thinking about what does Monday through Friday look like, just like you said. And that's a very real consideration when you're thinking, especially post-MBA, what do I want to be doing for the next 10 years to really build the base of my career?
I think it's really easy to fall in love with sort of that sexy idea of like, oh, I'm really excited about this industry. Oh, this is going to be so exciting. And And sometimes it is the right fit when I hear people say, oh, I'm really, when I was an undergraduate, I was really interested in renewable energy. And I thought that'd be really exciting. And then I started meeting people who worked in it. And it's like, well, you're not an engineer. So you're probably going to be a solar panel salesman. What are we talking about here? You're going to be an analyst crunching Excel spreadsheets for a utility or for a wind power company or something. Is that what you want to do? Do you want to sit there in front of the Excel spreadsheet with your econ degree and do that? To be fair, I think we've all fallen in that trap at some point of going, this industry sounds sexy. This job sounds sexy. This salary sounds amazing. Oh yeah, I can go work in banking and I'll make tons of money someday. And for some people, that's great. That, if that's really something that motivates you and you enjoy the work enough, fantastic. I know a lot of really happy investment bankers, but that's the understandable trap I think a lot of people fall into, especially career switching, is here's the thing that sounds great on paper. And then it's hard to ask the questions about the day-to-day. It's hard to get at that stuff. You can't Google it as easily as what's the salary.
And it's hard to put yourself in the shoes of feeling what a 90-hour work week looks like on Wall Street. You don't know until you feel it. And it's a pitfall for sure.
Okay. So now you're back in Colorado, you're doing real estate investing. The MBA thing's still there. You've got a son and you're kind of going, maybe MBA time again. How did that go? How'd you go about it differently? This is attempt number 3 at business school.
Yeah, this time, Charles, I think I did it right. I did the work beforehand in figuring out, what I want to do, but maybe even more importantly, where I want to do it and the environment I want to be in to kind of move from point A to point B. So I focused my school search on community, on places that had a really robust partners and kids, programming and activities and things like that. And I also just looked for a place where the school was kind of central to everything that happened in those 2 years. For me, a big city was not a great solution. I wanted to be on campus or nearby where the social life, the academic life, the recruiting life was all really focused on campus, and where your classmates, there's just a little more coherent path to make lifelong connections with your classmates. So I guess the cliche term would be like a tight-knit MBA program, right? And this time I went and visited schools and I called students. And I think most importantly for me, I called dads and just asked the hard questions. What's it like being in business school with your kids there? What would you change? What would you do differently? What advice do you have for me if I was thinking about doing that? And that made all the difference. And instead of just applying based on rankings or where I thought I could get in, now I was applying to schools that were just a great fit for my family. They were a great fit for my career aspirations. And they were a great fit for my learning style. And so I applied to Yale School of Management, Dartmouth Tech, Duke, and Michigan, and loved all 4 programs, got into all 4 programs, was very torn because I think I would have been happy at all 4 programs, but ultimately chose Tuck because it was kind of the perfect combination of all those different environments.
And so I guess as we think about sort of these 3 different years, you could maybe call it number 4 if you include your undergrad, 0-6 in the first round of undergrad admissions. MBA round 1, got accepted a bunch of places, chose to apply a second time instead, get into Stanford, wrong fit. Much more thoughtful this third round on the MBA applications, choose Tuck. And was it what you expected? Did you go there? Did it feel different to you this time? Was it what you wanted? Was it surprising in certain ways?
Yeah, I could probably spend the next 2 or 3 videos talking about Tuck and how much I loved it. What a great experience it was.
The Colts gotcha. The Colts
that's
gotcha.
Right. That's right. No, it was fantastic. It was, from day one on campus, it was very relational with classmates. It wasn't transactional. It wasn't, how can you help me get to my post-MBA job? It was, who are you? Like, what have you done? How's your family? All those kind of things. So immediately felt comfortable there. And one of the beautiful things about Tuck is that nobody's from, Western New Hampshire, really, that's going there. Everybody has moved there from somewhere else, excuse me. They're not bringing their old friend groups, and you're kind of forced to integrate, which was great. And we made, I can count, I don't even know if I can count on 2 hands the number of genuine lifelong friends that I made there individually and that our family made there.
Awesome.
It's just an amazing environment. Academically, it was rigorous in a great way. was like drinking from a fire hose of information from, some of the best professors in the world. Recruiting was fantastic. People come to Tuck because they want to. You don't accidentally walk on campus at Dartmouth. You have to make a real concerted effort to get there. And people just, I think the Tuck sort of culture and environment really resonates with a lot of recruiters because that's the sort of culture they're trying to build in their organizations. So it was a fabulous experience, and I really, I was really grateful I did all the work up front to know that what I was getting myself into, because it was exactly what I signed up for.
So the question I want to ask is, to what extent do you think Tuck tries very specifically to select students that are going to fit really well into that isolated community? You're 2 or 3 hours from Boston, depending on traffic, further from New York City. Yeah. But before I ask you that question, though, Matt, I want to be really clear to anybody watching. I don't want this to sound like an advertisement for Tuck. I know a lot of people who. So, kind of your list of schools in that last round, where you say, okay, Yale, Tuck, Michigan, Duke. Those are 4 of the schools. I might throw Cornell in there too. Where when a student or client comes to us and says, "I'm applying to MBA programs, I really want a close, tight-knit community." Those might be the 5 schools that come pouring out of our mouths first, because they're in less, not necessarily super out of the way places. I mean, we can argue about how isolated New Haven, or Duke is, right? I mean, Duke really is not that isolated at all. But these are less sexy cities. A lot of people go, "Oh, I want to be in, New York, Silicon Valley, LA, Boston, Chicago, maybe Pennsylvania, because it's a quick train ride to New York, and that's it." Right. And that's great. I think there are some people that really thrive in those urban environments, and at those schools, you tend to have less clannishness, or a less tight-knit community at the schools, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you have access to everything that the city itself has to offer. And the networking is a very different thing when you're in New York City than when you're in Hanover, New Hampshire. So as we sit here and say, "Oh, what a wonderful culture," I don't mean to make it sound like, oh, Harvard or NYU Stern or Columbia, these urban campuses can't have wonderful cultures. They certainly can, and almost certainly do. It's just a different culture. So just to be clear, as I ask you questions about how much you love Tuck and how great it was, I don't want to make it sound like we're saying, "Oh, you should apply to Tuck because these city campuses stink." It's like, that's not at all.
They are not a paid sponsor of this video.
No, but if you're interested, I get paid in donuts. They're delicious. All right. So say a little bit more about, because one of the senses I've always had watching applicants, over the couple decades we've been doing this, is when they go to their interviews at Tuck, or they interact with the admissions committee, and sort of who we see get selected by these schools and rejected by others, it seems like Tuck is very aware of where it is geographically, what it is culturally. It seems to me, from the outside, I've never attended Tuck, obviously, that they're selecting very deliberately for people that are going to integrate well into that community. Is that something that you felt when you were there? Is that something that's openly discussed in terms of kind of what Tuck is looking for out of their students?
Yeah. So I'll answer your first question first. You really get a sense, especially when you're interviewing applicants, the level of enthusiasm that they have to be there. And it's really easy to weed out the people who are applying to Tuck because it's a top 10 school, and the people who are applying to Tuck because they're really committed to being part of a campus environment where you're all you're there, you're in Hanover, and there's no escape. And it comes through really clearly in the interviews and just general interactions. People who want to be at Tuck, it's clear. And the people who apply because it's a great school and they have great recruiting numbers, it's not a recipe for success up there. As far as how explicit they are about who they choose, in recent years, they've become more explicit. They've said, "We want students who are nice." And it sounds kind of silly and cliche, but it's really true. I mean, if you're stuck with 250 of your classmates up there, you really don't want someone with sharp elbows, who you run into every weekend downtown. You want people who are committed to being, kind and courteous to each other and respectful of one another and things like that. And I think they've gotten more explicit about it because they can, and it's really part of the culture. And Tuck wouldn't be Tuck if it were just, a bunch of people there because of the ranking. It's people who are committed and enthusiastic and excited to be part of it.
So another thing that I teased earlier that I really enjoy about kind of the breadth of your admissions related mayhem over the years is then you got to interview Tuck candidates when you were a second-year student.
That's right.
What drove you to do that? And tell us a little bit about what that experience was like and kind of how it made you think differently about Tuck.
Yeah, I had a really differentiated interview experience when I visited Tuck. I had done a few of these on-campus interviews in years prior, and it was all very, it was fine. It was very formal. It was, ask the questions you're supposed to ask, get in, get out, kind of thing. But my interview at Tuck really made me feel welcome, and they really listened to, the points about me, not about my pedigree or my career.
Sorry, Matt, you were interviewing on campus, I assume.
That's right.
You made the trip out to Hanover.
Yeah. Which is a very intimidating experience. You're flying to Boston, probably taking a 3-hour bus ride up. You're in the middle of nowhere, and you're walking into a room full of people in suits who are all nervous about their interviews. And so, just 1 or 2 interactions that make you feel welcome there, that make you feel like they appreciate that you took the time and money to come up there and interview, really puts you at ease as an applicant and helps you open up more and tell your story in a more compelling way. And because of my interview experience as an applicant, I decided I wanted to be sort of that ambassador for the school. All I'm doing really is asking questions and recording an answer and kind of assessing fit from my perspective as a student. But what I could do for the applicant was make them feel welcome, appreciated, and just show enthusiasm on my side, which I think you don't necessarily get at many interviews in your life, someone who's genuinely excited to meet you and learn more about you. And so it was fun. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed meeting people and kind of just trying to help them feel more comfortable sharing their story.
And I think there's we'll do a whole other video some other time about interviews and crazy things people do in interviews. Give us a quick little, just I've heard some of the stories, Matt. Give me a quick little tease. I think often in admissions world, we have all these nice tools out there. You can go on Poets and Quants, and there's, what are my chances of admission? And GMAT Club has a bunch of tools like that. And those are wonderful. I think they're super informative.
Yeah.
But when we're kind of reading that on paper in 2 dimensions or on the screen, we kind of boil people's profiles down to sort of 5 lines of stuff. What's your academic pedigree, your GPA, your major, where you've worked, how many promotions you've gotten, demographics, GMAT score, GRE score, that kind of stuff, right? And that drives a lot of admissions. I mean, to be clear, those things that are fairly easy to quantify or look at on the top of your resume, of course, they're really, really important admissions decisions. What is it that you saw when there were candidates that came along where you go, yeah, if somebody was looking at this guy or this woman, this candidate on paper, you would say, oh yeah, for sure getting into Tuck. When did they not get in? And under what circumstances did a candidate who you look at on paper and go, oh, 640 GMAT worked someplace I've never heard of, went to university if you've never heard of that either. When do people end up getting those admissions results that are kind of counterintuitive, where somebody really punches above their weight because of the interview? And when did you see candidates who look wonderful on paper and talk themselves out of Tuck?
Yeah, it was, it becomes pretty obvious once you get in the interview room where Tuck kind of falls on the pecking order of schools that the candidate's interested in. Okay. And not always explicitly, but certainly implicitly, you kind of pick up on, well, if this doesn't work, then Tuck's great. And, I'd really like to do this. And Tuck does an okay job at that kind of thing. The interview should be in some ways kind of a love letter to the school. You get 30 minutes to sit there and communicate why you're a great candidate and learn more about the school. And that's not a lot of time. And so people who walk in enthusiastic about the school, who know the school more than what's on the brochure on the website, they really set themselves up for success. Even candidates who on paper are wishy-washy, right? So I've said it probably a dozen times already in this video, but enthusiasm is so important. Just showing you're there and you want to be there and you'll contribute to the school is huge. As far as people who kind of killed their chances, it was the people who didn't understand what Tuck was about, right? Like they read a couple blurbs and they could kind of parrot some of the points, but they just showed kind of a general lack of understanding about what makes Tuck special. And I think that's true of all the schools. If you don't know Columbia well and why it's such a superb school and you walk into a Columbia interview, you're not doing yourself any favors. And the third thing, Charles, and maybe the most important, was the story that they told wasn't coherent. It wasn't, the story they told in their essays didn't reflect at all in who the person was sitting at the interview table. They seemed like 2 different applications.
Huh.
And so what the admissions committee always talked to us about as the admissions associates was, we're looking for people with a really coherent story. They know who they are, they know what they're going to contribute to the school and the environment now, in 5 years, and as an alum down the road. And they know where they want to go, and they know, how Tuck or how X school is going to help them get there. So telling that really coherent story, I think, is the most important thing, and the place where really good applicants got tripped up because they didn't connect the dots for me.
Awesome. Okay, so that was round 3 of your graduate school. We're not done yet.
No,
that was round 3 of your or year number 3, admission cycle number 3 for you. Finally worked out, did a lot of introspection, picked 4 schools based on things that really mattered to you. You get in, end up in a place you loved, participate in the admissions committee, fantastic. I'm going to accelerate through the next few years of your life because we're already half an hour in here. We could spend another half hour talking about this. So internship, Amazon product management, interrupt me if I get this wrong. And you go, that's the thing I thought I wanted, not crazy about this. So you end up immediately after you graduate, General Mills, older, large, food manufacturing company, essentially. And that was a brand management role, correct?
That's right.
And then maybe also not quite the right fit, and maybe that's fodder for another video or another conversation. End up getting into admissions consulting about 6 years ago, and then kind of tack on some work in wealth management since then. But as I said, we're not done with the admissions adventure because that's 3 years worth of graduate business school applications, and there's a 4th one, and that's when you decided to pile higher and deeper and go for a PhD. So a couple thoughts here. One is, I know for most people watching this, if you're on a channel called GMAT Ninja, you're probably interested in MBA. You're probably not thinking PhD. One of the things I find endlessly fascinating, we do get PhD applicants, working on the GMAT or the GRE or the less often the EA. And often the amount of information that people have about PhD admissions is very, very limited. There aren't things like GMAT Club or Poets and Quants giving you all this information about PhD admissions. It tends to be more of a black box. So I guess 2 questions for you, Matt. I guess let's start with, what were you doing and why? What were you thinking? What drove you to go for year number 4 of grad school applications? And what do you wish you'd known ahead of time?
Yeah. So at the time, I'd been working in the investment wealth management space for a couple of years, and I kept finding myself following these crazy rabbit holes of just the minutia of the markets and things like that. And I'm like, how can I monetize this? And so I kind of harkened back to my time taking classes at Tuck in my MBA program and thought, I would really like to do finance research and be a professor, maybe at Dartmouth. That'd be great. And so I thought, step 1 is go get my doctorate. I really love this stuff. I can nerd out on the market mechanics till the sun comes up. And so because I'm a glutton for punishment, decided to take the GRE and apply to a number of schools after consulting with some of my professors at Dartmouth. And it was always kind of an optionality thing. It was, my job now is great. I'd love to teach, I think. And because, like you said, it's such a black box about what life as a doctorate student looks like, what career trajectory looks like coming out of any number of sort of strata of schools. I treated the application process as a discovery process in parallel. It's like, let's apply, but also figure out what life as a PhD student would look like and what the career might be down the road. So it was an adventure.
Okay, so it drove you into it. You had close relationships with your professors at Tuck, and you kind of go, oh, wow, this is a bunch of folks that study really interesting things. The research is fast. When I see them give a seminar on the research they're really passionate about, or when I work with them on their projects or whatever, amazing. They get to teach all these amazing students. Looks like a great lifestyle. And you go, yeah, I want to do that. Mm-hmm. So you apply to 23 PhD programs. And at what point, so what happens from there? You got this idealized idea. It sounds a little bit like your first 2 rounds of MBA applications. And
yeah, we're just starting over, yeah.
Professor, sounds great, looks great. What did you learn along the way? I guess I'll spoil the punchline. You ended up getting into a bunch of schools and choosing not to attend. But when did that light bulb go on? What started to change for you over the course of 23 applications?
Yeah. So to anyone in a similar spot, I don't recommend picking an Ivy League professor to model your whole career plan on. They're extraordinary, and they've done extraordinary things. And so I didn't. When I went into the process, I sort of assumed my trajectory would be very similar to my professors at Dartmouth, and I didn't contextualize that because those professors went to the elite of the elite doctoral programs. They probably did it, 2 to 5 years out of undergrad. And, they were just a very different place than me. And, I applied in my mid-30s, well out of undergrad, without a lot of the sort of prerequisite economics and math courses that a lot of other applicants had. And my job trajectory, really, no matter how good my research was just never going to be the same as some of those Dartmouth professors. And I learned that in the process, and that factored into the algebra of not going and doing the program. But it's important to be realistic. And like we talked about earlier, I tend to fall into the idealistic kind of view of graduate school, apparently. But it was a great learning experience. Again, I made more mistakes, and hopefully can communicate that to some of our viewers here on what not to do. But like I said, it was half application process, half discovery process. And I discovered that 5 years of graduate school making, a pretty meager stipend was not worth interrupting my career for.
Especially with a family.
Right. Yeah. Having a couple kids in tow and being a student again for 5 years is not exactly what I had in mind for my career.
But at least you discovered it before you started school.
Right.
And so, I think things Matt and I have in common here, we're both Stanford dropouts. I dropped back in later. He was wise enough not to start a PhD program. I actually left a PhD program. Long stories here. If you're watching this and you're interested specifically in the PhD journey, PhD admissions, or just what is this? What do they not tell you? Matt and I can talk a blue streak about that. If that's of interest, leave us a comment on the video, please. And if that's something that enough people are interested in, we'll do a little Q&A on that, because that's a super, super fun topic of what really happens in PhD programs that doesn't really make its way onto the internet in forms that are easy to consume. All right, wrapping up here a little bit. So I realize that most people watching this are probably thinking MBA. Matt, after your 4 different years of graduate business school applications, 37 applications, 52 interviews as an applicant, plus the 40 plus interviews you did in the other seat when you were at Tuck as an admissions associate. If you could give people one big piece of advice, one takeaway on just how to not make a gigantic mistake in this process, how to minimize your pain, how to make this easier on yourself, what's one thing you'd like people to take away?
Yeah, we toss around the word introspection a lot, and it's become cliche and almost meaningless to an extent, but doing the work up front and really spending time, introspection is not just a thought exercise. It's really, it's talking through, it's journaling through, it's thinking through, what do I want to do with my life, with my career? How do I want to do it? Who are the people I want to do it with? And on a day-to-day basis, do I want to be in a big corporate environment? Do I want to be an entrepreneur with my pants on fire all the time? Do I want to work in a startup? All these things really matter. Doing the work ahead of time and getting a crystal clear picture of what you want to do is really the best start to your MBA journey. And then from there, once you have a really good picture of what you want to do, you work backward. And you say, what are the schools that will get me there? How high do I need to reach? And once you know kind of the schools that can get you there, you say, what are the schools that are best for me? What are the best learning environments? What are the best environments for my family? What's the best geographic location given my goals? And it's a lot better way to work back that way than it is to say, I want to get an MBA, let's start at the top of the rankings and go from there. So I think doing the work ahead of time, really thinking about who you want to be, how you want to be in your career is absolutely vital, and will set you up for being able to tell coherent stories that really involve specific schools. And ultimately, you're going to produce the best MBA applications when you know exactly where you want to go.
I love it.
Don't do what I did.
I love it. Thank you so much, Matt. Obviously, if you're watching this and you're like, ooh, that Matt guy, he does interesting stuff. Look at all that crazy experience, good and bad. You want to work with Matt? He's an admissions consultant with us now, does great work. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe as always, and plenty more admissions videos coming out soon. Matt and I are going to talk about some interview war stories at some point here in the next couple months. So please like and subscribe, and thank you everybody for watching.